What is up? Paul is the first person here. Paul, let me know you can see and hear me in the chat, bud. Mark's rolling in. Torsten, Varun, Nick is here. Clinton is here. As you're rolling in, Sean is here. Philip, Powell, Poland is here. Mike is here. Joyful Susan is here. Love that. Adam West is here. Great. Make sure you can pop open the chat window. I love you, early birds. And let me know that you can see and hear me and where you're tuning in from. And your favorite movie of all time. Let me know your favorite movie of all time in the chat box. And if you change your drop-down menu from all panelists to all panelists and attendees, we can all enjoy. We've got Darko from Slovenia, Torsten from Germany, Varun says Lord of the Rings, Adam West says Toy Story, great choices. Mike is in the Shenandoah Valley, Virginia. I used to live in the Shenandoah Valley. Mike used to live in Harrisonburg. He says his favorite movie is Blade Runner. Ooh, good choice. What do you think of the new Blade Runner, 2049? One of the best movies, Darko says, is Three Idiots. Joyful Susan is in Big Bear, California. Mark is tuning in from Johnson City, Tennessee. Yes, you're just joining us. Let us know where you're tuning in from and what your favorite movie is. Now we're literally on the top of the hour, so we will allow a few people to join in. Torsten says favorite movie is A Star is Born. That was a good movie. That was intense. Some good acting. Philip is in the Netherlands. Gladiator. Oh, Gladiator. Mike says, so yeah, Mike, so I went to JMU also. What years were you there, man? I graduated in 2005. Clinton says Star Trek The Voyage Home is his favorite movie and is tuning in from Canada. Paul is tuning in from Springfield, Massachusetts. And then Blues Brothers, favorite movie. Sean's from Ireland, listening in for the first time. Welcome, Sean. Nick's favorite movie is Princess Bride. Mike, okay, Mike, you're a little older than me. And by older, I mean wiser. That's awesome. I love JMU, man. That's where I met my wife. Nice recovery. Yeah. I'm a little quick on my feet. I've had a lot of practice. No, I love JMU. I loved Harrisonburg. Met my wife briefly right before JMU, but we really started hanging out when she came. She was a year behind me. And just grew a lot as a person there and at my church there, and then loved just the area. We stayed around for 3 years after graduating till we came down to Tampa. It was a lot of fun. Paul says, Graham, all greetings from Warsaw, Poland. Hard choice on movies. It might be One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Man, you guys have some really good taste. Joyful Susan says, favorite movie is hard to decide, but That Thing You Do. Oh my gosh. You do that thing you do. Such a good movie. Man, this is a good list of movies, y'all. Okay. A couple minutes after the hour. Let's get our housekeeping in order and let's get started. So if you've never been on the live call, there's a chat box. And if you change the drop down to all panelists and attendees, then what you chat will be seen by everybody. So it's more like a group chat. Otherwise, it's only me. And then there's a Q&A box that I want you to open up. And that is where I would like you to actually submit your questions and just submit it once. I can then go through it linearly and I will not miss any question. I can check them off as I go, so I won't miss your question. And if you're watching the recording, I've got your questions that hopefully you submitted inside the community pulled up here as well, and I'll be going through those. I love you too. I know you couldn't make it for a variety of reasons. It's hard to pick one time with time zones literally all over the globe. But let's dive in. So whatever questions you have, it can be anything about recording, mixing, music, gear, business, life, whatever you want to talk about. We can talk about all these movies that we just dropped in the chat box if we want to as well. We'll go through it. Varun kicks us off here in the live chat. Graham, I'm a producer from India. I seem to be slightly struggling while recording vocals. I generally do about 3 to 4 takes per section if the vocalist is really good. I'm currently working with an artist who is picky about doing many takes. Oh boy, and it becomes a nightmare while comping and choosing. Yup. Most often I can't even hear much difference or improvement in the performance between each take because there isn't any. I'm sure you've been in such situations. How do you handle them? Especially when too many takes could risk blowing out the vocalist's voice. This is a great question, Varun. Thank you for asking, because this is applicable to anyone that's worked with clients. And vocalists, and I can say this because I am one, are the worst. They're worse than drummers. And drummers are pretty bad. No offense if you're a drummer, because I always wanted to be a drummer, so I'm jealous. Vocalists are the worst. Typically, not all vocalists, but can be the worst because they're so darn insecure. And also, this is the horrible soup. They're so darn insecure and so darn arrogant and cocky at the same time. And I can say that because I am one. As the vocalist, you think that you are the most important part of the band because you kind of are, in the sense of like the vocals are, really important. But it gets to your head if you're a vocalist and you think you're the shiznat, as I would say to my wife. And at the same time, because you're a vocalist, you're so exposed. It's not like just playing guitar. It's nerve-wracking enough to work with musicians who are like nervous to record because they're like, what if I don't play well? There is nerves for anyone in the studio if you're newer, but it's not the same as putting your voice out there. It's like, it's just you exposed. And so there's some insecurity there that either you're not good enough or you won't do a good enough job. So just know, Varun, that when you're working with a vocalist, assume that they're completely insecure and completely arrogant at the same time, which is a super sweeping generalization. But if you keep that in mind, you'll understand why they want to do a bunch of takes. Oh, let's just do another take. Let's do another take. Because they think, hey, I don't know if this is good enough and I want it to be amazing because my reputation is at stake. And so if I just sing a bunch of times, hopefully you'll have something in there you can use. Literally, they will say that to you. Just sing, let me sing 7 and then hopefully there's something in there that you can use. Your job as the engineer is to act like a coach. And a coach is there, yes, to serve the talent and to help the talent achieve his or her goals. So you're ultimately in a service-based business, help them sound their best, but also to coach. You are, and I view myself as this with clients, and I think you should too, view yourself as their trusted advisor. And what that means is you want to advise them on what's going to lead to the best product. So I always lay down ground rules before we get started. I say, hey, we're about to record vocals. Here's how I have found this works best across a myriad of vocalists. We're going to get your levels. We're going to let you sing while I loop the song. And I'm just going to be messing with the preamp, messing with the EQ, whatever. And you're just warming up. So warm up your voice, try things out. We're not recording. Or I'm just getting levels and things set. And then when I've got things set on my end on a technical standpoint, I'm going to let you know. And then what we're going to do is record through the song completely top to bottom. We're not going to stop and start like verses and choruses. I'm not a big fan of that. And I'll tell you why in a second. But just tell them we're going to sing through the song completely 3 times max, okay? And what we're able to do is sing it like you would. I find that vocalists perform better if they sing it like they would live, where we're not stopping and starting. So that if you screw up a word or you're slightly pitchy on a word, don't even worry about it. Just keep on rolling. You know why? Because A, I can fix anything. And B, what I'm going to do is eventually take the best parts of each of these 3 takes and put them together into one super take. So you don't need to nail it on any of these takes. If we like chorus 1, you just explain comping basically. But you tell them 3 takes is what we're going to do. No more, because I don't want to blow out your voice. And also I found that we don't get any better beyond 3 takes typically. At the end of those 3 takes, if we both feel like we want to hit one section or 2 sections with a deep dive one more time, like, hey, let's just tackle the bridge a couple more times because that note gets really high, right? You can do that, but that's it. So it's setting expectations and saying like how easy it is to comp together later, but you found that 3 is the magic number. Let them be free. Let them sing. You need to coach them so you don't basically let them run the show. You want to be able to run the show in a way that makes them feel like you have thought through this and you know what's best for them to perform their best. So again, I usually personally only record 2 takes for my own stuff, and I don't want any more than 3 for client stuff. And then if we need to, we'll deep dive into 1 or 2 things. But man, coaching vocalists is not just about getting the good vocal sound. It's about dealing with human beings. It's the soft skills of dealing with people that's really important. Great question, Varun. Mike emailed this earlier, but we'll repeat here. Okay, cool. I'll get to your question. He says, Mike says, you recommended the Avid 11 rack for amp modeling in an earlier live Q&A. Given that Avid is discontinuing that product, what would you recommend as a viable alternative? I wouldn't. I would just get it. Here's why. I don't use it in Pro Tools. It's just a hardware unit. So it doesn't require any software. You don't have to use the plugin. Like, it's just a box. Like, who cares if you don't even have to use it with Pro Tools. You can use it with Logic. You can use it with anything. You plug your guitar in, run the line output into your audio interface. It's just an audio signal. So has nothing to do with support from Avid or anybody. You can use it live. You can use it any DAW. It's probably going to only get more of a deal if they're discontinuing it or not supporting it. So anyways, I would totally get it now because it's probably going to be even cheaper than ever before. There are other great guitar interfaces. The 11 rack kind of pioneered a lot of things. It was just one of those oddball things that Avid got right years and years ago. But I still use it in the studio and still use it live. And you can use it with any DAW. So I would still recommend it. Great question. Talking about drummers, Nick said Phil Collins must be the worst thing because he's a drummer and a singer. The worst. I don't know. I've never worked with Phil Collins, but maybe he's a super nice guy. I like to assume that all British people are polite. I hope that's true. I've got a few Brits on my team, and they're very polite. Let's see. Adam West says, Graham, what's your favorite movie? And then favorite movie soundtrack. So favorite movie, I don't have one favorite. I have three that are my top three, and they're all equal, and they're all Christopher Nolan films. Inception, Interstellar, and The Prestige. Boom, boom, boom. Ask me on a certain day, and one might jump out better. But those movies are mind-bending, mind-blowing, flawless acting, innovative concepts. That's the kind of movie I like. I like all kinds of movies, but like that is the cream of the crop. And it just so happens that Christopher Nolan is crushing all three of those as a director. Love, love, love. And I love the soundtrack on Inception and Interstellar. I don't think about them in terms of like favorite songs that I'm humming all the time, but I really appreciate the super meta creativity of the soundtracks. I think it's Hans Zimmer, I think, for both. I know he works with Hans, but it's just insane when you look at what they did with the soundtrack on both those movies and how they use sound as a storytelling element. It's not just like cool orchestral music. But movie soundtracks that like I would hum the most or for sure Star Wars or Jurassic Park because, hey, John Williams. Great question. Sean Donnelly Live says, when I transfer into Melodyne, do I have to transfer out again? Depends on which version of Melodyne you use. There's a version where you can kind of just transfer it into Melodyne and then you have to press basically render it. It renders it back out into an audio file. But these days, I think you can just use the Melodyne as a plugin, insert it into your DAW, and you just have to like capture it in a Melodyne and then just tune it and then leave the plugin on, and you don't have to do anything else as long as the plugin is on. What I like to do in Pro Tools is do track commit or track freeze, which then prints that so I don't have to use any processing live. Torsten says, Graham, you always told us to reference a song, but in your mixing academy mixing walkthrough, you didn't do so. Did I miss something? Oh, in Mixing University? Yeah, because I got that question a lot. Those mixing walkthroughs weren't about referencing. They were just about the steps of mixing as taught, because I already did videos in that course on referencing and how to reference. So I already covered referencing globally. Like, here's how I do referencing in a mix. So you can see how I do it. The walkthroughs, I didn't want to make them any longer than they were. I just wanted to get through the walkthrough so you can see how it comes together. So that's why. All right, inside the community, Raven wrote in, Graham, thanks so much for this forum, this opportunity of talking and learning from so many great people. Also, thanks a lot for your videos and Q&As. Thanks to them, I was able to finally release my music online. Preach. That was me adding that. So I have an Audio-Technica AT2020, and although I like it, I find it a bit too bright, especially in my voice. I can kind of fix it with EQ, but I was wondering if it wouldn't make more sense to get a darker mic. I've tried using a dynamic mic, a Sennheiser E835. We have those at our church. Those are good. And then I get the opposite issue. Voice is too boomy and closed off. Can you give me examples of darker mics that I could use? Great question. Great thinking, Raven. So yes, if you find that the 2020 is too bright on your voice, yes, you can fix it. But if you're going to record your voice a lot, get a darker mic. You know, one of my favorites, they don't make anymore, it's right up on my shelf, is the Kel HM2D. If you can find one on eBay, Kel Audio HM2D. It is a very round, very dark, vibey sounding microphone. But for you, I would try a Shure SM7B. That's another dynamic that isn't going to be as bright, but I'm curious to hear what it would sound like on your voice. And then 2, consider a ribbon microphone. So just sort of, you know, go to Sweetwater or Musician's Friend or wherever you buy microphones and search not by condenser or dynamic, but by ribbon mic, and see if you can find an affordable ribbon mic and give one of those a shot. Otherwise, just use like a virtual tube from Steven Slate type plugin to darken up the microphone. That'll work really, really well. Great question. Brandon Gonzalez inside of the community wrote, currently using Logic Pro. I'm trying to make a headphone mix for a vocalist to just let them hear themselves and get it in the moment while recording. I have the microphone on an empty track to record dry vocals. What plugins or effects would you recommend I use on the aux I'm bussing to? I want the vocalist to be able to hear and feel the song and get the best take without causing too much latency. So Brandon, the latency issue depends on your interface, honestly. If you have a Thunderbolt interface or USB 3 interface, then you won't have really any latency issues, and you can drop in reverbs and delays right on their track and record through them, and they can hear themselves with reverb, and you can just take the reverb off later if you don't want to actually print it. If not, if you have latency problems, what I do, and I have a video on this, I'm pretty sure I do have a YouTube video on this. I've taught this somewhere, so I think it's on YouTube. But the concept is you've got the talents track coming in that you're recording, and then use a bus or an aux track to be their headphone mix, and then you can use sends to send everything inside of the mix to that bus the way you want. So send a little bit of their vocal, send a little bit, you know, of the drums, send a little bit of the bass, and a little bit of the click track, all into this one bus that's going to their headphone amp or whatever. But then what you do is you send their vocal to a reverb, and you send the reverb into their headphone mix as well. So they're going to hear their dry vocal, but they're also going to hear the reverb decay, which is going to be delayed, but it's okay because guess what? It's reverb, and they won't really notice it. So it'll give them a little bit of that wash. But generally, as long as they hear a little bit of reverb, if they feel that it's too dry, and sometimes compression, if you can put a compressor right on the track, especially if you have low latency, or if you can record through a compressor, even better, that makes the vocal sound more polished, what people are looking for. That can really help. Let's see. ITNGTHNDR212 wrote, have you ever taught or thought about doing a DAW walkthrough on Reaper, Waveform 10, or Cakewalk by BandLab? Yes, I've thought about those. I don't have those programs or know those programs. So what you're seeing over time, especially here in VIP, is I'm adding tutorials on different DAWs from some of my friends who are masters at the DAW. So I have a friend that's really good at Reaper. I need to get him to do one inside of VIP. I'll try to reach out to him. But Cakewalk, Waveform, I don't know. I don't get a ton of requests for those, but I'm always open to suggestions. And Terry wrote in, I'm new to Mixing University and VIP. Thanks for all your how-to videos leading up to my participation. I just wish I'd been in a position to join sooner. I know your take on plugins, but I recently switched from Pro Tools to Studio One, and it came with Melodyne. Once again, I'm in a learning curve. Have you ever used this to edit with? Any thoughts or suggestions? Melodyne is the greatest thing ever to exist for vocalists. So I've been using it for 15 years. I love it. So I've got a couple of videos on Melodyne on my YouTube channel, but they're probably outdated. But the concepts are the same because the overall flow of Melodyne is the same. But it's amazing. So yeah, I have Melodyne because it's not that it's a third-party plugin. It's something that Pro Tools couldn't do. Pro Tools doesn't have piece of tuning software. So you need something to tune vocals. And I've used auto-tune, but Melodyne is just a more useful tool and more natural sounding. So yeah, I've used that for many, many years, and I highly recommend it. Let's see. All right, inside the live community, Varun asked, when it comes to mixing, I follow a very simple technique which you taught, LCR panning. So I work on the static mix for about 30, 40 minutes before going into individual tracks, etc. I sometimes see that my mixes don't get as wide as I want them to be. I've tried using stereo imaging plugins like Ozone, but I'm not sure if I'm pushing it too much and messing up the mix. Yeah, so Varun, it could be a number of things. I don't know without listening to your mix. Typically, if you find that your mix isn't wide enough, I would start with your panning choices. Do you just have a lot of double-tracked guitars, a double-tracked synths? If everything's doubled and panned left and right, LCR panning won't actually help you, because then it all sounds like it's everywhere and it all sounds the same. And if everything's stereo and everything's hard left and right, like if you get a lot of stereo synths, like when I get a lot of tracks that have a lot of production and they're all coming out of Logic or Ableton and they're all stereo stems and it's keyboards left and right, stereo, synths left and right, effects left and right, it's all stereo. If everything's big in stereo, it just sounds like big mono, right? To quote Dave Pensato, it's just big mono. There's no real stereo. Sounds wide when you can pinpoint the different things that sound different. So the key to stereo width starts with having different sounding things on the edges, especially that sound different from the stuff up the middle. So I would almost favor like an electric guitar and a piano on the hard sides if you had them, as opposed to a stereo piano and double-tracked electric guitars. I'd rather put the guitar over here and the piano mono over there, because I'm going to get a sense of the edges very clearly as a listener, and then I can feel how wide it truly is. So start with maybe rethinking your panning decisions and collapsing some stereo tracks to mono and then choosing where they're going to go. It's okay to have stereo tracks, but just collapse them to mono and put them one place. Not so everything is everywhere, because then nothing is anywhere. Right? The other thing is stereo widening can be really helpful, but do it in moderation, right? Do it in moderation. It's the same advice with donuts. Donuts are really helpful for your happiness, but in moderation. So I don't mind stereo widening just a little bit, just to get a little bit of the edge, but man, don't go too much, because then it is unnatural what it's doing. But it can be very, very helpful. Great question. Philip writes here in the live community, many mixes I hear have really good separation of the bass, guitar, vocals, especially in the low mids. The bass seems to sit nicely behind the vocals, and the vocals seem to be very upfront and clear clear throughout the frequency range, with the bass seeming to just sit behind the vocal. I love this clarity. How can I go about getting similar results? Really great question. Love that you're listening to tracks and you're pinpointing what it is about them and you're visualizing the tracks. That is the first step to getting good mixes. It's not saying, how do I get a good mix? It's like, that's a very specific question. How do I do that? How do I get the bass to sit right behind the vocal? I don't know, because I don't know what you're listening to, but I will say that play with the high end. The brighter something is, the closer it sounds. The darker something is, the farther away it sounds to us. Okay? So that's why you want vocals to typically be bright. They sound upfront and close and intimate, which is important for most styles with vocals. Bass guitar, while needing some upper mid-range, like 1K, to have a little bit of like, intelligibility on small speakers and a little bit of clarity, you don't want to be very bright. And every bass is going to have high frequencies, whether you hear much of them or not. So maybe consider a low pass filter that rolls off the top end and lets the lows pass through. And it might let that bass kind of just sit further back if it's competing, if there's some like sizzle up top that's competing with the vocal. That's one option. Torsten writes here in the community, I don't own Melodyne, wink. What of these 3 plugins, if you know them, would you recommend for pitch correction on vocals? Apple Logic Pitch Correction, Waves Tune, or Auburn Grallian 2? I've only used Apple's Logic Pitch Correction of those 3, but I would say Melodyne. That'd be my answer, Melodyne. It's super cheap. I think it's $99. Demo it. Just demo it and work on a vocal. I think you'll enjoy it. You should have way more control. And those Germans are really smart. The people at Slemony, dude, they were pioneers with pitch bending technology. Darko says here in the chat, there's a version of Melodyne for $49. Dude, $49 to make your vocalist sound like they can sing? No brainer. I would do it in a heartbeat. Nick Fox says, maybe you mentioned this before. Where can I get it? Go to solemnity.com or just type Melodyne. Just Google Melodyne. You can buy it anywhere. Sweetwater, Musician's Friend, anywhere you buy plugins. Although I don't know about if you're talking about Darko's $49 version. Darko, can you put a link here in the chat of where you're seeing it for $49, unless that's always an option now? Thank you, brother. Nick Fox says, I've never heard you talk about your musical influences. If you feel it's appropriate here, would you tell us? Oh, yeah. So I'm heavily influenced by the 90s grunge rock scene. So when I was like 10 was when I was really like aware of music, starting to get aware of music. That would have been 1993. It was Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, Nirvana. 2 years later, it would have been Foo Fighters. All those bands, right? That was Green Day was big. That was like what I was crushing on the radio. Stone Temple Pilots. Those 6 or 7 bands, right? Summed up what I was listening to on the radio and what tab books I would buy at the local music store as I started to teach myself guitar. I played trumpet growing up because my dad played trumpet. I was a singer first, always sang in choral groups and choirs and stuff. They offered band when I was in 4th grade, so when I would have been 9 years old. And I played trumpet because my dad played trumpet and I wanted to be like him. Plus, he already owned a trumpet. And he was like, hey, we're not going to pay for another instrument, so you're playing trumpet. Learned how to read music, playing an orchestra and all that kind of stuff was really, really helpful. And played trumpet all the way through high school in like, you know, basketball games, football games, that kind of stuff, concerts. But I never really loved it. I wanted to be in a band because I wanted to sing, and I didn't want to just be a singer that stood there. I wanted to have an instrument at least around my neck. So I was like, I'm going to teach myself guitar. So this is middle school. So, you know, when I'm like 10, 11, 12, and I'm teaching myself guitar, I told my parents I want a guitar. They said, hey, we're not going to buy you a guitar, but your grandfather has an old 3/4 length neck acoustic guitar that your grandmother used to own that he's not using. It's in his attic. Use that. If you can prove to us that you can learn how to play something on that, we'll buy you a proper guitar. So that was the deal. It was this crappy acoustic guitar. It was really high action, really hard to press the strings. So that's like the worst way to learn guitar. And that's how I taught myself. I'd go buy tablature books and learn how to play chords to the songs I learned and listened to on the radio, which would be Stone Temple Pilots and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains and Nirvana and Foo Fighters and all that stuff on acoustic guitar. That heavily influenced the way I thought about chord progressions, vocal melody, song structure. Then growing up with my dad's a musician, so we would have late night listening sessions on the weekends. Like I would come back from hanging out with my friends or playing video games. I'd come downstairs and my mom would be asleep and my dad would be smoking a cigar and he would have his record player out and he would be listening to records. And he'd say, hey, Graham, sit down. Let's listen to Jimi Hendrix. Let's listen to Led Zeppelin. Let's listen to Rush. Let's listen to Pat Metheny, you know, jazz. Let's listen to Wynton Marsalis on trumpet. Let's listen to Handel's Messiah. You know, let's listen to Stevie Wonder. Let's listen to Doobie Brothers. Let's listen to, you name it. We would just do this weekend after weekend. I would just sit there. He'd put a record on. Michael Jackson, Enya. I mean, the list was like all over the map. Stevie Ray Vaughan, and we would just listen to music and vibe out. And he would play the stuff that he liked in high school and college. And then he'd play the stuff that he was listening to when I was just a couple years younger, like in the 80s. He played a lot of 80s stuff. And then he's who got me into Alice in Chains. He'd be like, dude, listen to this song Rooster by Alice in Chains. Like, dude, that song's awesome. So I'm heavily influenced by just all kinds of stuff. Because my dad just has a wide taste for music, which is a wonderful thing. So those things influenced me heavily. As I got into the 2000s, I got really into like Linkin Park. I got really into Switchfoot. I got really into even in the 90s, right? Like trying to think some of my favorite. Like I got into the Offspring. That was like the most punk rock I would get into. Incubus, love them, saw them live. I like rock and roll where there are distinct creative melodies. Like to me, if the vocal melody is either boring or like there's so many lyrics that like the vocals are all over the place, I can't handle it. Like I got big into Audio Slave. Obviously, I love Chris Cornell, so any of the stuff with Chris. But I really like good vocal melodies. They're so important to me. So those are all things that have influenced me in the early years. Good question. Yeah, it is a crazy eclectic exposure, and I really have my dad to thank for that. Inside the community, Clinton, I think, is here live. You wrote in, Graham, my question's about reverb. If my mix sounds really dry and I want to add some ambience, what would you recommend using, or would you, recommend using just one type of reverb via Ascend for each individual track where it's set to different amounts, or should it be added to the whole mix at the very end? Also, so let's address that first. Yeah, one type of reverb that you use sends to send to. Don't put a reverb on the whole mix because you have very little control and it can really wash out, and it's adding frequencies to your mix that then you can't really control very well. So I would rather you put a reverb track on a bus, send a little bit or a lot of bit of anything or nothing to it. And then you can even put an EQ at the end of that reverb to filter it so it's not adding too much low end or weird top end, depending on your situation. And then also he says, is it a bad idea to use more than one type of reverb on a mix? Let's say, for example, a plate for one thing, a hall for another, a string for another. It's not a bad idea. It can be a bad idea if it sounds like poo, but I would try it. There's nothing wrong with blending different ambiences if there's a reason for it. So for example, you might want a certain type of reverb on your snare drum, but a different type of reverb for everything else, and maybe even a slap delay for everything else. The key with ambience is to have a reason for it, and to have it amplify and add to your sounds. Otherwise, it can become a mess overnight. Yes, I've stated in the past I'm not a huge fan of reverb. Clinton's apologizing. Sorry about this. Sorry I asked about reverb, bro. Dude, don't have to worry about it. Reverb is super helpful, but I find that I get better results with delays than reverbs, but I definitely use reverb. So great questions. Scott wrote in, Graham, thanks for all you do for us. Here's my question. What computer do you recommend? Also, should it be a laptop or a desktop? I'd like to have a laptop to be mobile with around the house and out of the house. However, I see many use a desktop, and you can also have a larger screen with them than with a laptop. And he has follow-up questions. Okay, great question. Bro, no right or wrong answer, but you just answered it. You want to be able to be mobile, so laptop. That's what I use. I've flip-flopped over the years. But the laptops these days are super powerful. So I'm running a MacBook Pro, and when I'm here in the studio, so right now, you can't see it, but right now, my laptop is closed, and I just have a big old external monitor. You can plug in any computer desktop monitor into your laptop. So it does not matter the size of the screen of the laptop. When you're home, you can have any size screen you want. You can have multiple screens. So in that regard, a laptop makes a lot more sense than a desktop because they can be just as powerful these days, have just as big of a screen when you're at home, and guess what? You can take them mobile. The negative to laptops would be you don't get as much bang for your buck. So you're going to pay more for the same amount of power, or you're going to get less power for the same amount of money you can afford to spend, typically. And connectivity, if you really need like a PCI slot. But these days with Thunderbolt, USB 3, USB-C, everything like the MacBook Pros in the last couple of years got rid of all their ports, and it's just Thunderbolt ports, which is the same like USB-C connection now. So everything goes that direction. You can plug anything, and you can serial chain them. So you can have a Thunderbolt monitor plugged into hard drives, plugged into a little breakout box that have USB ports and SD card slots for my camera stuff, whatever you want. So these days, connectivity is no longer an issue because a lot of laptop manufacturers are moving towards a sort of a standard USB-C style connection. I'm a Mac person. I've been a Mac user since 2002, 2003. They never have issues, and they're very stable. And I prefer the Mac OS over Windows, but I use Windows for my whole life. I've made records on a Dell PC, but on Sonar years ago. But I prefer Mac, so I'm a big Mac fan. And I've used Mac Minis and MacBook Pros. And then he asks, sneaking another question, what are your thoughts about miking drums? I'm intrigued by the Glenn Johns 3-mic method that he incorporated with John Bonham and during other classic rock era, aka my era. Pros and cons of this opposed to miking every drum besides the cost and need for several mics and inputs. Do it. Try it. The pros are a more natural sound, easier to mic up, and it can sound huge, fewer phase issues. You gotta understand something. The more microphones you add, the more phase issues potentially you bring into the equation. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I've done videos on phase before, but anytime you have multiple microphones pointing on one thing, for example, your snare drum, you hit your snare drum, your drummer hits the snare drum. If you've got overhead mics, a snare mic, even a kick drum mic, that snare drum sound is not exclusively going to the snare drum mic. It's being picked up by the overheads. It's being picked up by the kick drum. It's being picked up by the toms. So that means every mic is hearing the snare to some degree at different distances, aka delayed, and therefore a chance for it to be out of phase, which means it's actually going to make your snare drum sound thinner because there's phase cancellation happening. Now, it can all be fixed, but it's more work and you have to know what you're doing and just pay attention to it. It's not that it's impossible. It's just more of a mess to deal with. The fewer mics you have the fewer the chances of phase cancellation. If you have one microphone, there's no possible way for phase cancellation, so it'll sound as full as possible. So I like Glenn Johns because you have the elements you need: kick, snare, and overhead. Well, traditional Glenn Johns, it's really kick, overhead, side overhead. So it's really a kick and two overheads. I've done plenty of records that way, and if you do it right, it's a really punchy sound. If you had to add any other mic, I would add a close spot mic on the snare. And the reason for that is, and the good thing about close mics and the more mics is you have more control. But kick and snare, ideally, you have a track for each of those because then you can compress and then you can trigger samples. You can do multiple duplicates of the snare drum and have like a super fat sounding snare drum and a super hype sounding snare drum and mix them all together. There's a lot you can do when you've got individuals, but Glenn Johns is a great setup if you've got a good sounding drummer on a good sounding kit in a good sounding room, or at least decent sounding room. Great question. All right. Let me see. Woo! Excuse me, my friends. Inside the live call, Calum says, Graham, thanks for all your help across the years. I've been following your content about making money from a home studio, but I'm unsure if my niche is too broad. I'm comfortable across recording, mixing, and mastering, but also I like helping artists with visual content to support their music, album art, video teasers for Instagram, etc. I'm a designer by trade, so I feel like I have the creds to offer this, but feel offering packages for music and visuals might put into question the overall quality across the board. Should I stick with serving both of these needs or narrow it down? Great question, Caleb. So I love it. Here's how I would approach it if I had your skill set, which I don't. I would if you want to focus on recording and mixing, that's what I would present as your main services. But then you can have a la carte options that you either post publicly as well that aren't as featured. Like you don't have a page for these, but when people see your services, you can add a la carte like custom album art, custom video stuff packages, and you can mention prices for those, or you can say inquire about these if you want these added on, or don't mention them at all. And then what you can do is when someone wants to book with you or inquire and get a quote or whatever, however you do it, then you can say, great, let's mix your record. And you know what? I'm going to over deliver by offering you one free round of album art, and not like with no tweaks, or like one round of tweaks or something that won't like cost you a ton of time, but you can keep that in your back pocket as an over deliver to do their album art or to do one concept for their album art. And just as a gift, thanks for letting me mix your record. By the way, I also do album art, and I just went ahead and created one for you. Feel free to use it. If you like it, great, no problem. It doesn't cost you anything. If you want to do more rounds of design with me, it's a service I offer. I'm happy to offer that to you. I also do video orders. So more on the back end, you could transition into that. I think you could certainly offer that. And I think a lot of people be like, dude, that's super cool because I hadn't thought about that. But you don't have to publicly mention it or publicly promote it a lot. Great question. Joseph says, Graham, did you upgrade the Mac OS recently? No, I never do. I'm on last year's. I'm on Mojave, I guess. So I've not upgraded to, is it Catalina? Is that the new one? I try to like save that as long as I possibly can. Especially a few months in, because usually I have a bunch of programs that haven't gotten updates that are for the new OS. So I'm not worried about the latest OS ever. Great question. Someone in the chat, going back to computers, said, I use a MacBook Air, powerful enough and lightweight enough. Plus you can use it for live recordings on the road. Yeah, I've recorded through a MacBook Air before. Harder to mix on, but certainly great for mobile recording. So for the longest time, I had a Mac Mini as my studio computer, and then I would take my MacBook Air to do mobile recording. But if you want to go mix somewhere, the MacBook Airs, they might be more powerful now, but generally speaking, I found that they're not as powerful on mixing. All right, let's see. Feel free to add your questions to the Q&A box. I'm back inside the community. Marty Helly said, Graham, adding on to Scott's question about recording drums and particularly focusing on live situations, how do you get a good drum sound that you can mix down that doesn't bleed all over everything else in the mix? As an example, I find this live mix incredible, as good or better than any studio production. He's got a YouTube video. Let me go see what it is. Let's go see what this is.
We need to act like a happy family. Anyone showing insufficient happiness will be shot.
HBO.
Gives me great pleasure. That's enough of my private life. Anyway.
There's all you need is faith to hear.
So I haven't listened to a ton of it. Obviously, Marty, I'm just getting a sense of it. Let me get a cut ahead to where maybe the drum's hitting harder. So, Marty, here's the thing with drums, like live, getting good drum recordings is not the hard thing. It's what you're describing is that the drums bleed onto everything else. So let's think about what else it wouldn't bleed on too much. Bass guitar, because you just pull the DI. Amps that are mic'd up, because it's like a dynamic mic. It's right in front of a grill. It's not going to get much drum bleed. The biggest area you're going to have drum bleed is on the vocals. So depending on how big the stage is, where the vocalists are positioned, and what kind of mic you're using on the vocalist and how close they eat the mic, hopefully very close in a live application, that would be your only problem for bleed. But again, if the singer's good, bleed isn't that big of an issue. But again, if you want the live recording to sound as good as humanly possible, what a lot of live records do, and I hate to tell you this, is they re-record stuff after the fact. So it's not all live. Right? So, for example, I've recorded the Easter service worship set at my church last couple of years. And we record every Sunday, but I rarely use it. So, and we're pulling off the multi-tracks. And I put up a couple of crowd mics. This is the only thing I added on Easter. And just record everything. And then what you do after the fact is just re-record anything that messed up, like any guitar parts or bass parts, or re-record the vocals. Now, Clinton says live is live, studio, studio. And the answer is no, actually. That might be your preference, but a lot of live records are not 100% live. For example, it's based off of a tour. So let's say your band goes and tours 20 cities. They're going to record every single night, and they're going to pick the best version of each song from the best nights. There might be one night where they really were on fire and most of the songs come from that, but it could, in theory, be one song from one different stop on the tour to put together on the record. So in that regard, it's not really one live performance. Two, a lot of times, unless it's like live at the Red Rocks and then it's that performance. But a lot of times if it's just on the tour, it's just a live record, it's pulled from different nights. Two, they're triggering samples on drums. They're re-recording things like acoustic guitar, because acoustic guitars sound awful when they're plugged in direct. So a mic'd up acoustic sounds better. So they'll just re-mic up an acoustic playing the exact same part, so you have that better sounding texture. And then a lot of times they'll either re-record all the vocals from the lead singer, so there's no bleed. So when there's no bleed, you can do compression and EQ, or tuning if you really want to. But more important than that, a lot of times, or if that's not the issue, it's certain sections. They'll just re-record certain sections and then try to blend the two together. So more often than not, live recordings these days have post-production and there's stuff that's re-recorded. Because if the purpose of it is to, because here's the problem. Live environments have so many other stimuli to cover up flaws. You can feel the music. The bass, because of subs, is huge. The kick drum is huge. And the speakers are just loud. B, the crowd is hyped. And there's just excitement and screaming and cheering and people singing. C, or 3, you have visual stimuli. You're looking at the band and they hopefully look cool and they're jumping around, and that makes you experience what they say or sing or play differently. All of those things, plus the fact that you're just having a great time, maybe there's a beverage or two involved, all those things make you experience the live environment one way. If you just get a raw recording of that and try to mix it and go back and listen to it and you were there live, you'd be like, dude, this sucks. This band sounds weak, right? But that's exactly what the performance was. And it worked live. It wasn't bad live. It just translates poorly in a recording. So you need to amp up the recording through crowd mics to get a sense of the room, because otherwise it sounds really small. That's a big tip. And then a lot of times, a lot of work on samples on the drums, and then possibly re-recording the vocals to get them to not have bleed so that you can control them, or so that the singer can do a better job. Because if you're going to listen to a recording over and over again, it better be so close to flawless. Because that's the beauty of a recording, is like people can listen to it whenever they want. A live show, you mess up the pitch on one thing, people forget it in 5 seconds and they just remember the excitement of the song. But if it's on a recording, they will never forget it because it's always there. And I'm not talking about like slight being off in pitch. Like even studio recordings, I don't think should be perfectly tuned. I'm just saying clear issues. There's no grace in a recording because it's on there forever. So your job is to make sure that it doesn't sound awful, and you do whatever it takes to fix it. And it's hard to tune live vocals if you were close to the drum set. It's possible. So if the stage is big enough, like really big bands where you're far away, like Rush, for example. Like I love the band Rush, right? I've seen them live. I have a bunch of their live records. They're one of the best live bands, period, because they're just freaky good musicians. You know, in the 80s, in all their live records, even in the 90s, they're not going back and re-recording the vocals. You know why? Because A, they're some of the best musicians on planet Earth, and B, they're playing on a massive stage. Right? So Neil Peart is like back on his spinning awesome like tower of drum kit, right? And Geddy Lee's not even in front of him because there's only 3. So Geddy's over there at the angle, right? And Alex Lifeson's over there on the other angle. So his vocal mic is so far away from the drums that just put a gate on it, and when he's not singing, you're good, right? And he's a great vocalist live, so you're good. Is it perfect? No, but it's pretty darn close. And again, they'll probably pick the best performance from the best night on a tour. That might be the most manipulation they're doing there. So you certainly don't need to re-record the vocals, but it is a very powerful tool if you're on a small stage and there's a lot of drum bleed. Really good question, Marty. Joseph Valander wrote in, Graham, my question is about automation. Is it okay to automate during the production stage before you start mixing? Sometimes I find myself putting all kinds of automation on tracks when I reach the mixing stage. Can't control the volume on my fader. So how can I solve this problem without changing the automation that's already there? Should I just deactivate the automation and come back and adjust it later? My question for you, Joseph, would be, why are you adding automation while you're doing production? It's not that it's wrong. I'm just curious as to why. And so if you're doing that in Pro Tools, I don't know what DAW you're in Pro Tools, yes, you can, if you've got automation lanes and you've done all this crazy automation, you're like, oh crap, I just want like everything to be like a dB louder. And obviously if you grab the fader, it will just slip back down to wherever the automation is. If you zoom out in the automation view in Pro Tools, you can click the volume line all the way to the right away from the automation, click and drag, and it'll move the entire line and its automation up or down without adjusting the individual automation. Very powerful in Pro Tools. I'm hoping you can do that in other DAWs, but I cannot speak from experience because I don't know. And then Scott writes, oh, me again. What are your thoughts on the pros and cons between going with an interface like the Focusrite 4 Pre and a combination mixer interface like the Allen and Heath ZI-10? Let's take a look at that. I don't know that one, so I can just get a visual on what you're talking about, Scott. Okay, it's a little little mixer, 10 channel, USB. The problem, let's see how many 4 in, 4 out. Okay, so it's only 4 in. Okay, which is fine. It's the same as the 4 Pre. Okay, I'm just reading the stats. Some of these mixers have like 8 channels, but they only combine them into a stereo input, which is kind of dumb. But that looks like you got the 4 mic pre's. So only channels 1 through 4 can be recorded, it looks like, or only 4 at a time. So the benefit of something like that, Scott, would be that you have EQ and compression, or at least EQ built in, which is nice. It's like having a little mini channel strip on each channel. The beauty of the Focusrite 4 Pre, are you talking about the Focusrite Red 4 Pre or the Claret? The beauty of the Claret, if it's the Claret, actually, that's what I'm thinking, that's more affordable, is that it's Thunderbolt. So when Thunderbolt, you can have super low latency if your computer is if it's new in the last couple of years, which means you can just record through plugins, which I feel like gives you more flexibility and more options than using the Allen Heath. So I would prefer a Thunderbolt interface and just use plugins and record through EQ and compression there than using the mixer board. But that's just me. Great question. Marking that off. In the live call, Joseph says, with your use of Mac, why don't you use Logic Pro? Because I like Pro Tools better? I mean, just because you have a Mac doesn't mean you should use Logic. But Logic is a great program, but I've been on Pro Tools. I have Logic. I just prefer Pro Tools. Torsten says, what do you think about music distribution for local bands these days? Should bands still produce CDs? Should they put the music on Spotify? Should they offer their tracks on the band's website for free and play more live gigs? You can certainly make CDs if you're going to sell them at your shows, but honestly, who has a CD player? I don't even own a CD player. My car doesn't even have a CD player anymore. My computer doesn't have a CD-ROM drive. I can't play a CD. So a CD seems like a waste of money to me. 100% you need to be on Spotify. And 100% you need to have your website like stream your music on Spotify for free. And you're not going to make money selling your music. This is a really, really important distinction. I did a video years ago called The New Rules of the Music Industry. And I talk about this, and I try to talk about this whenever I can. But music is a commodity now. It's no longer the product that you sell. So don't try to make money selling music. Like, that's really hard. And it's almost like a fool's game. Like, people are going to get your music for free anyway. So give your music for free. Let more people stream it. You want more people streaming it, hearing it, sharing it. And what you want to do is build up an audience on a place like YouTube. Do YouTube videos, play covers, play your own music, do behind the scenes, do live streams of you songwriting, or do live concerts, whatever. Connect with other musicians, tour, play shows. What you're going to sell is a combination of live tickets, merchandise, but my favorite is a online membership, like a fan site. So how you've paid to be a member of VIP, right? You could have a membership like that for your fans, your super fans. It's like an old-fashioned fan club, but modernized. It's like people are using Patreon, which is an example. You can have people support you through Patreon, like, hey, give you $1 a month or $3 a month or $5 a month or $10 a month to support you putting out your music and videos and stuff on a monthly basis. That's fine, but you can build your own with a platform like Kajabi, or just through a WordPress site and some plugins and things like that, where they pay you a monthly fee, $5 to $8 a month, to be part of your fan club. And what do they get? They get a t-shirt the moment they join, or some stickers or something mailed to them. But then every month they get access to a live interaction with you like this, a private concert that you stream live for your fans only. They get access to like exclusive tracks or demos that you don't release anywhere else. They get your album before anybody else gets it. They can help you come up with names for your next songs or next album. You can put them in the liner notes of your songs, whatever. It's like super fan stuff. And they pay you to support your art. And what they get is access to you and to be a super fan. Most of your fans won't do that, but if I were a musician today and that's all I was going to focus on, I would put out a ton of free content on YouTube. I would get my music streaming as much as possible. I would try to share it on social media. I would try to connect with other bands. I'd try to play gigs and stuff. But what I really try to do is build an email list and eventually pitch people my fan club. And it charged like $8 a month or $7 a month. And my goal would be to get 1,000 members in there. That'd be my long-term goal. If you $8 a month and you get 1,000 fans, super fans in there, that's $100,000 a year. Done. You don't need to sell CDs, right? So that's what I would do. Your music is becoming the free thing you give away, so you can sell other things later. Good question. Todd says, I bought the Scheps OMNI channel because you recommended it. Do you still use it and recommend it? Yes, dude, it's super powerful. I love it. When I want like a Swiss Army knife kind of plugin, it's like either that or the SSL channel strip. I love the flexibility of it, and it sounds really, really good. It also can do like a lot of mid-side processing if I ever want to go crazy on that, that the SSL can't do. Mike says, when it comes to recording vocalists, how do you determine the best position of the microphone? What makes you decide that having the mic slightly above the nose pointing down is better than below the face and near the chest while pointing up, or just directly in front of the mouth? Okay, so you're talking about angle. Okay, so for one, I wouldn't put it down angled up, because the closer it is to your chest, the more chest tone you're going to get, which is a low mid build up. It's going to sound like woofy, like woo, woo, woo. So I don't really want that. That's why typically you'll see it, usually right in front of the mic, right in front of the mouth is fine. If anything, if there's a lot of plosives or too much energy or it's a little too bright, I would go slightly above and angle down slightly. That's it though. But 9 times out of 10, I just put it right in front of the face, and it's just more of a matter of distance and mic choice. Great question. Clinton says, I only have a Focusrite 2i4 for my audio interface. There's no real way to bypass the preamps. I also have an Art Pro preamp, which offers many more features. If I want to use the Art Pro through my interface, how would you recommend using or going about it? Is it a bad idea to preamp a preamp? No, so that's not a problem. So I do the exact same thing. I have a Focusrite ISO 220, which is a channel strip, like an old Focusrite channel strip. And I run that into my Focusrite interface. And there's no way to bypass the preamps either. What you do is put it in line mode. So your preamp channel, let's say if you've got your Art Pro preamp and you're going to take the line out of that into your interface, you want to put it into the line input with a 1/4-inch cable, more than likely, and make sure your interface is set to line, not mic. That adjusts the internal level because it knows it's a much hotter signal, so it's not going to do nearly as much boosting on the Focusrite side of things. And then your manual, download the manual for your Focusrite, and it'll tell you where on the volume knob is 0 dB. Where's unity, right? It might be like at 3 o'clock, it might be halfway up the middle, where anything past it is a boost, anything below it is attenuating. So your manual should tell you, mine is set, it's at like 9 o'clock. So it's like a quarter of the way up, and it's set to line input. And that's where I feel like on my claret, that's where it was set. So you're really not getting, and with these Focusrite preamps, they're so clean. So you're not going to get any coloration. And as long as you're in line input on your interface, you're not going to get a lot of gain. It's mostly going to be the sound and the gain from the art preamp or whatever your external preamp is, because that's what you're doing. Not a bad idea at all. I've been doing that for years. Great question. In the VIP community, Mike, I see your question. We already talked about the 11 rack. Joe Navoa says, Graham, could you reinforce the importance of feedback when writing songs? I have an example on the forum, Eros Monocles, where I asked for suggestions and ideas for creating a bottom end soundscape and ideas for percussions. I got so many different ideas that I would never have even thought of. Without the feedback, the song would have not been complete. I love that you brought this up, Joe, and I appreciate that. So here's the dirty secret. No one likes feedback, especially when you're crafting something of art. Very few of us do, because we're really insecure. We think we've got something nice that we're building or writing or creating. If I share it with somebody else, what will they think? If you're like that, and that's me, get over yourself and realize what's more important, feeling insecure or having a better song? And the answer is having a better song. That's the right answer, by the way. You don't need to share it with the world. Joe, I love what you did. You just posted it in the VIP community, which is the point of this community, by the way, because, hey, you don't know these people personally. This is the best place to invite some feedback on a song you're writing, because everyone in here is like you. Everyone in here wants help, wants feedback. That's the entire purpose of this community, is a network. Take advantage of the network. But even if you only have one person, right? So like I'm collaborating on an EP right now with my buddy Ill Factor, who's a super talented producer out of Miami. We've done 2 singles together, Raise My Flag and Thief. And it's been a lot of fun. He does a lot of EDM and pop stuff, and I do a lot of rock stuff. So when we write together, it's really, really cool. It's fun, but it's also nerve-wracking, because I can come to him with an idea and be like, hey, what do you think of this? And he can be like, yeah, the bridge or it's kind of lame, or the hook, boring. But once I get over myself, he'll say, what if you did this? And I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. You know, it's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that. And then he'll create something, and I'll do the same thing and be like, bro, oh, we shouldn't do a bridge here. We should just go straight into the chorus, double it up. So what's coming out, and I can't wait to share it with you, what's coming out is a better product than what he would have done or what I would have done individually. And that's a little bit different because of the collaboration. But anytime you can get at least one person who is a musician's feedback on your song, at the very least, it'll give you ideas that you've never, ever thought of. You don't have to have them rewrite the song. You can still kind of go in the direction you're going, but think about every piece of art that's out there, every movie that's ever been made, every TV show they've ever watched, every album that's ever been produced. Never, ever is it just one person from start to finish, ever, right? There's always at least one other human being that got in the room at some point and had some perspective to share. That's how you get good. Even the best people that can write, record, sing, mix their own stuff have someone else come in just to double check it, or at least a mastering engineer, right? So totally love that concept. Nick wrote in, one of the steps I do when referencing a finished mix is to open it up in Amadeus Pro and view the waveform statistics. I also open up a iTunes mastered file as my reference and compare the 2 waveforms. I can compare the minimum RMS power, average RMS power, and maximum RMS power of my master to the iTunes mastered file. I notice that the minimum RMS power is sometimes infinity dB, and my master is around minus 100 dB or so. Does this really matter when comparing? Could you explain the difference between minimum, average, and maximum RMS? No, it doesn't matter. And you know why, Nick? Because no human being will know or care. Really what matters is average and maximum RMS. So RMS is average volume. So the average volume, the RMS level for the whole song on average is probably the most important one. What is the average volume across this song? It might be louder in the bridge than it is in verse 1, but across the song, what's the average level, the average volume? That's what you typically want to compare to the masters to make sure you're in the ballpark, because that's what people are going to feel going from song to song to song when they scroll through a playlist. And then maximum RMS, I don't think is as important as long as you don't feel like your song is getting too loud at any one point. So I wouldn't have, like, you could have an average RMS level at minus 10, let's say, and that's good compared to what you're referencing, let's say. But if your maximum is minus 1 RMS, that's crazy loud. To be not just peak volume, but if your maximum RMS gets up to minus 1, that's crazy loud. So I feel like that would be strange. But I would just look at average and maximum RMS and try to get in the ballpark there. Really good question. Thanks for asking. We're over an hour. I'm going to just go for a little bit longer here if you guys have some time. Emily Garnett wrote in, Graham, I unfortunately won't be able to join the live session, but I look forward to catching up afterward. My question is, I'm using a D-Box. Absolutely love the addition of width. So the D-Box is from Dangerous. It is either sort of like a monitor management / summing box. Love the additional width and clarity it gives while mixing. One thing I haven't been able to find anywhere is information on how to take the best advantage of going back and forth between monitoring the DAW and monitoring the summed mix. I can hear the difference, and it's more than evident to me, but how does that equate to the final mix I'm printing? I've also found that the level of my summed mix is always significantly lower than my DAW mix. Would love to see how the gain stage to the very end of the signal print bounce while using analog summing. Thanks a million in advance for all that you do. Emily, great question. I'm not going to be a good person to answer that for you because I don't use any kind of summing box. I keep it all 100% in the box. A great resource to check out is Fab Dupont. Looks like Fab Dupont over at puremix.net. He's a good friend, really talented engineer, and has a lot of great videos. And he's got a ton of videos over there that he did years ago on his hybrid mixing setup of how he uses his interface and his summing mixer and levels and all that kind of stuff. So I would go look up Fab Dupont is what it looks like at puremix.net and look up any of his hybrid mixing videos. He's got some good walkthroughs. Yeah, Darko said, Fab is good. I love his sense of humor. Yeah, he's got a really silly French accent and a really great sense of humor, which is a great combination. He's also a really talented mixer, and he has a hybrid approach. So that's where I would point you to. Eric Beatty wrote in, we'll have to miss the show today, so I'll have a question in advance. It's about combining EQ and compression. I've been watching many different videos on mixing lately, and I've noticed that some people say it's best to put an EQ with cuts before a compressor and then to put an EQ with boosts after the compressor. So EQ, compression, EQ. This way, the boosted frequencies won't make the compressor pump too much. But is this really necessary? It seems like there would be loads of EQ comp, EQ instances all over the place in my mixes. Thanks for the time, taking the time to hang out with us and answer our questions. Great question, Eric. And no, it's not necessary at all. I follow the logic, right? So remove what you don't want before you hit the compressor. And then once it's cleaned up and compressed, if you want to boost, add a boost there. I don't do that. Because A, it sounds like a waste of time, too many steps, and B, I don't feel like the gain is there. I actually would rather adjust the tone, because here's what I do. With EQ, I do cuts and boosts, and then I level match the output so that the signal that I'm sending from the EQ to the compressor is the same volume as going into the EQ. I'm not sending any extra volume into the compressor. I'm just changing the tone of the track with an EQ so it's better sounding and fits in my mix better. And now that I've got that better sounding, same loudness as before, just better tone, then I want to level that out and have it be more consistent tone. So that's the way I think. I don't think you need to do it at all, but really good question. And then Chris Aitken wrote in, I'm submitting my question in the proper place here. You're absolutely in the right place, Chris. He says, are there any hardware solutions for banks of sounds like symphonic string chord shots for MIDI on DAW? To access. Sorry, I just got a lot of parentheses there. I love my old analog JX3P programmable synth, but MIDI is fussy. It doesn't always work unless I leave it for a while and then repower the keyboard and restart a new window or whatever. And its acoustic sound alikes string oboe are cheesy. I'm finishing a song on new window. I'm starting new stuff in Cubase and even fiddling with Audacity. If I can ever get Pro Tools first to see my UR22 audio interface, I might even use that. So I don't want to be stuck with plugins that may not port from one DAW to another. That's why I'd rather just draw the notes on a MIDI track than play them and record them through hardware bank of sounds. Did they call this a sequencer back in the 80s? Yes, they did. I'm curious, Chris, as to why you think that plugins won't port from one DAW to the other. I honestly think a plugin would be the best option for you because it will port from one DAW to the other. Every DAW can use audio units or AXX or whatever Pro Tools uses these days. I'm sorry, they changed the plugin format a couple times. Or VST. So like if you buy a Waves plugin, let's say, it's going to give you the audio units, the VST version, and the AXX for Pro Tools. So as long as you own it and you have your serial number, you can use that in Nuendo and Cubase, Pro Tools. So I feel like a plugin would be the best bet for you because it will work moving forward and it's future proof. All that being said, I don't have any experience with like hardware sequencers. That's not my world, so I couldn't really speak to that. Great question, though. Daniel Jr. Sherry wrote in here live. I just bought an electric drum set. Can you give us some tips on how to record a drum on a DAW using plugins or MIDI? So you're probably going to have a MIDI out of your drum set, which should then go into a MIDI in, or it's USB or something, but it can hopefully be seen as a MIDI device inside of your DAW. And if that's the case, then you just drop in any virtual instrument, or any drum samples that can be triggered by it, right? So like you could drop an Easy Drummer and it be triggered by the MIDI notes that you're creating live, right? So it just depends on the plugin specifically that you're recording through, but it's no different than you having a MIDI keyboard, right? And then hitting the keys and triggering the plugin. So you set up the plugin on a virtual instrument track in Pro Tools or a MIDI track in your DAW. You drop in the drum plugin or the synthesizer or whatever with a drum patch or bank of drum sounds, and you have your keyboard plugged in. And when I hit this key, it's, I got one right here. All right, when I hit this key, sorry, it froze on me. Whatever. Can y'all still hear me? Because my screen froze. Hit one key, it makes a kick drum sound. Hit another key, it makes a snare drum sound, whatever. Let me just make sure this is plugged in. What's up, guys? Sorry about that. Y'all still hear me, see me now? Oh, I'm back. I'm back. Oh, man. It's not bad. I don't know how many years I've been doing these things, and that's literally never happened. Thanks for hanging out. I'm just going to finish up that question or two, and then we'll wrap up. But basically, what were we talking about? MIDI. Yes. So it depends on the plugin. That's what I was saying. It depends on the plugin. And I was trying to show you my darn MIDI keyboard, but just like any MIDI keyboard, you're hitting one of those, triggering the drum sample. Your drum kit is just another MIDI instrument triggering the drum sample. So it should be set up the same way you set up a MIDI keyboard with any virtual instrument in your DAW. If you had a question that you posted in the last few minutes, I don't have it anymore. It disappeared since I logged back in, but I'd love to answer the last couple of questions if you have any burning questions here on the live call. Appreciate y'all hanging out and not leaving on me. Had to reboot the computer. Jefferson says, Graham, do you have, okay, this is your question. Have you used Heat for Pro Tools? If so, do you notice a big difference in your mix? Is it comparable to any other commercial vintage emulation plugin? So Heat is only available in Pro Tools HD, and I don't use Pro Tools HD, so I don't have it. I've used it like once years ago in another studio. But it sounds really good. It's an old model, you know, like Stephen Slade's Virtual Console Collection came out, and that was a newer thing. And then Waves has their Nonlinear Summer, and there's newer ones now. But Heat's really cool. I thought it was like one of those, again, Avid/Digidesign had a few really killer products. There was a season where they had some really creative people, and when they were building the Avid 11 rack and Heat, those were all some killer products that I think still sound great today. Mark says, I want to add 8 more XLR inputs into my Apollo Firewire. Any suggestions? Does the Apollo have ADAT on the back? I can't remember. I used to have an Apollo. Because if it has an ADAT input on the back, that's how you'd add 8 more XLR inputs. Because then you could buy a Focusrite Octapre or any branded 8-channel mic pre that has ADAT out. Super affordable, super great sounding, and then one little cable goes into the back of your Apollo, and then you can unlock banks 9 through 16 inside of your Apollo. Mike had a question about the Scheps OMNI channel strip. Does that plugin obviate the need, ooh, good word, of separate EQ compression or DS2 modules? Yes. So you could just do a whole mix with the Scheps channel, the OMNI channel. Much like I'll use the SSL channel strip, and I won't use individual EQ or compression. So yeah. When would you use it? If you're a channel strip kind of guy, I would just, well, here's what I would do. I would do in your next mix with nothing but the OMNI channel strip. Make it like a challenge. Just do the entire mix, if you can, with that channel strip. You'll learn it well, and you realize that it's just like a console. It's like choosing, are you mixing on an SSL console, or are you mixing on a Scheps console, right? You know, a Scheps OMNI console. It's literally just a different sounding EQ, different sounding compressor. And there's more features, more flexibility, and some different tools inside of it than, let's say, the SSL channel strip. But it's just gonna have its own sound. And that's how I like to learn channel strip plugins, is do a whole mix. Like I've done a whole mix with the Euphonics emulator in Avid, which is, what is it? What is that channel strip? I think it's just called channel strip. Maybe that's what it is. But it's emulating the Euphonics System 5 console from years ago. But they bundled that in Pro Tools 10 and beyond. And you can do a whole mix with just that channel strip plugin. That's super cool. And it's like, that's your console. Or I did a whole mix with a Focusrite channel strip years ago that was based off of their Forte consoles. And I've done whole mixes with the SSL channel strip and the whole mixes with the OMNI channel strip from Scheps. So, you know, you can see how I'm a weirdo, but that's what I would do. Great question. Torsten says, do you know the Waves Abbey Road Studio 3 plugin, Virtual Room for mixing on headphones? Any thoughts on it? Yes, they sent it to me, and I have still not used it yet. So I need to try it out and see if it's any good. I generally don't like stuff like that, especially if it adds any kind of ambience. Like I don't need that. Like I don't mind like frequency correction, like with whatchamacallit, sound, like SonarWorks. I don't mind SonarWorks and things like that. But when you get like weird ambience and spatial emulation, those things never seem to make sense to me. They sound too weird and distracting to me. So I haven't used the Abbey Road Studio 3 yet, but they sent it to me. So I will check it out at some point. Great questions. Hey, thank you guys for hanging out. And thanks for hanging out when my computer froze on me when I think I was literally pulling a cable to show you my my keyboard, and it was pulling like the monitor cable from the thing, and so and it was also my webcam was plugged in, so it started to like freeze on the webcam, and then it just freaked out. But I came back and I was able to answer the questions. We got through all the questions inside the community. So if you're watching the recording, thanks for submitting a question. And again, thanks for being a VIP member. And if you are new this month, I know a few of you have been joining new. We've been celebrating 10 years of Recording Revolution. Welcome. So pumped you're here. Have fun. Dive in. Enjoy it. Honored to spend some time with you. And take advantage of the community. There's thousands of you now. So when you post something, you have a good chance of someone diving in. And hey, why don't you dive in and answer someone else's post and give feedback for someone else? Be the community person you want others to be. And guess what? We'll continue to have a really super dope community here. So thanks for your time. Have a great rest of your day wherever you're tuning in from. And I'll see you inside the community and see you next month. Bye.